thank you guys so much for joining me for communication and conflict resolution. I hope you're ready to have a conversation about having conversations. Over the next 2 episodes, we're going to be diving in on communication basics, conflict resolution, and talking about how to talk about it. So welcome to Communication and Conflict Resolution. So I am Jessica Fern, and I'm the Director of Training and Development for FPI Management, and I'm really excited to talk to you guys about this topic. In our industry, there are so many critical conversations that we need to have, not only as leaders in the industry, but as coworkers and teammates. And in order for us to make progress, we have to be able to address conflict in a healthy manner. And sometimes we shy away from conflict, and conflict is actually a really positive and productive thing. It's when conflict turns into combat that we have to really pay attention, because combat is unhealthy, but conflict is healthy. So join me as we move through this amazing topic. We're going to start with how to understand conflict and how to move through it. We sometimes shy away from disagreement and from conflict itself, but there is such a thing as agreeing to disagree, and so we'll dive through that as well. We're also going to understand how our feelings, our own personal feelings, play a role in conflict resolution. We only get fired up about the things that we care about. So we're going to talk about triggers, how to manage triggers, and how to move through them when we are in the moment handling conflict. And then we're going to learn the steps and tools to handle pre-planned conflict, because we all know there are some times going into a conversation where we know it's going to be heated. And additionally, how we handle in the moment conflict, because we can't always predict when it's going to happen. So let's get started with the basics on just communication. So for me to have a conversation with you, and in order for it to be productive, there has to be a certain level of trust present. And trust is important because you want to be able to assume my best intentions as I need to be able to assume yours. If we don't trust each other, we're not going to be able to have a productive conversation. Sometimes assumptions come into play where if I don't trust you, or maybe I don't even know you very well, if you tell me something, I might second guess it. There might be a certain level of defense that comes because I want to protect myself. Being transparent is also really important. People do well when they know what to expect. When my intent is clarified, it's a lot easier for you to buy into what it is that I'm saying, because you don't have to second guess what it is that I want to convey to you. I also don't want to hide anything. If I've got something to say and I'm clear about it, you don't have to second guess whether or not I'm being honest with you. Clear intent is also important. I want to make sure that I'm coming to you with a place of being genuine and authentic, so you, again, don't have to second guess where I'm coming from. And also carrying questions. Anytime we are having a conversation, when I can talk to you about it and ask you questions before I decide how I feel about a conversation is really important. Conversations are a two-way street. And in order for me to talk with you, which is dialogue, that is us exchanging thoughts or ideas, I need to be able to involve you in a conversation. Otherwise, that's classic delegation, where I'm just talking at you, not necessarily with you. And in order for us to have a productive conversation, I need to be able to work with you, not just tell you what I feel or tell you how I am thinking at the moment. So that's the recipe for a good conversation. We want to make sure that we are including trust and transparency, clear intent, and asking questions again before we decide how we feel about a conversation. And I've definitely done that before. I've had someone tell me something, it kind of hit a nerve with me, and I'm like, oh, well, this, that, the other thing. And I didn't really slow down to get the full clear message. And as leaders and as teammates and colleagues, we need to be able to give the folks that we're working with the benefit of the doubt. And that can be a hard thing to do sometimes, especially if you have a challenged relationship with someone. So those we'll get into as we're managing triggers. Okay, communication is actually pretty simple. So we're going to break it down to 3 things. It's trust, It's safety and it's intent. So when I trust you and I feel safe with you, it's easy for me to hear your clear intent. If I don't trust you, then I'm going to get defensive because I feel unsafe. There's going to be something about this conversation that I'm trying to protect. So if you are having a conversation with me about maybe something that I didn't do well, or you need to correct, or maybe you're my supervisor and we're working on, developing my skills together, if you don't come at me in a way that protects my values and who I am as a person, that is going to make me feel unsafe. And what do we do when we feel unsafe? We get defensive. It's our natural instinct to want to protect ourselves. So going into those conversations, we need to be very careful that we are protecting that going in. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you are working with me on a report that I'm doing, and I didn't do it very well, and you need to correct a couple details. If you come at me and say, "Hey, Jessica, you didn't do this report the way that we talked about. There's attention to detail that's missing, and we can't send this to our portfolio manager in this condition. I need you to go back and redo it." What that sounds like to me is that it's not about the report. It's about me. We haven't separated me from the actual issue. What we want to do is we want to go back in and have the conversation and make it about the actual issue, which would be the report. So, "Hey, Jessica, do you have a second? I want to talk to you about the report that you gave to me this morning. There's some information missing, and our owners really count on all the details being present and accounted for so they can have a full picture of where we're at. Our regional manager is counting on these details being present. Can you and I work on this detail together?" So it makes it a little bit more about the report and less about me. How do we know when conversations are going south, and how do we protect them? So a couple key things to look for, though most of the time you can tell because people will get defensive or they'll show up in a way that I like to categorize as silence or violence. So silence looks like sarcasm, it looks like shutting down, it looks like walking out of a room, one-word answers, so people tend to just shut their systems down. Violence can show up not like, legit violence, but I'm raising my voice. The words that I'm using with you aren't very nice. I am being really short with you. When you start to notice those things, that is your job as the speaker to step out of the conversation, restore safety, and then go back in to talk. And the restoring safety piece is really you are looking to find, what is this person trying to protect? Are they trying to protect their quality of work? Are they trying to protect their integrity? Are they trying to protect their authenticity? We need to make sure that they feel safe enough to have this conversation in order for us to be productive. We want to be careful that we are not getting into a battle of emotions. I'm sure you've argued about arguing. I've totally argued about arguing. Like, "Oh, no, you said this then." "No, I didn't. I said this then." And you're like, "Really? We're not making any progress here." So step back, find a way to protect whatever this individual is trying to protect, and go back in to have the conversation. Your job in a failed conversation is to restore safety. We need to make sure that when we're having conversations that we are holding ourselves accountable. Like, would you have a conversation with you? And that's kind of a gut check question. Like, am I the type of person somebody else would want to have a conversation with? Am I approachable? Do I shut conversations down? Am I open to new ideas? That's kind of a check yourself or you wreck yourself moment. When folks are coming into my office, am I willing to hear you out? And if not, why not? Right? I don't have to have all the answers. I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to have all the good ideas. That's the best part about working on a team is the collaboration piece. So we want to allow people to come in and talk to us freely and openly and give them the space and opportunity to do that. Listening is a form of respect. And if you are in a supervisory position, you're in a position of authority, you're working with other individuals, that is one of the best things that you can do is listen to your people. In my role at FPI and as the director of training, I am working with our site team members, our street team members all the time. And one of the things that I hear the biggest feedback about when I talk about what makes your relationship with your supervisors really, really great, one of the things I hear the most often and the most consistent is, I can talk to them about anything. And that's what we want. You want to be able to be that individual where, yes, we can talk to you about anything. It's going to take your team from good to great when everybody gets an opportunity to speak. And that's not just when you're managing conflict. That would be anytime you are working on a new initiative, if you are collaborating, if you're in a team meeting, we always allow folks an opportunity to speak. All right. So failed conversations. So again, our role is to go in and restore safety when we feel like those conversations are heading south. But really, in a nutshell, when you feel like a conversation isn't going well, it comes down to three things. The first one is, what's the problem? What is behind it, and what do I need to do to protect it? It's three things, very simple. When those conversations start to fail, that's where we need to go back in. So one of the things that I like to do is a technique called contrasting. So if I know I'm going to have a difficult conversation, I'm going to clarify my intent before I even talk to you. So it's called, what I don't want to do is this, but what I do want to do is this. And that's called contrasting. So let's go back to our report example. So this is how it sounds. Jessica, do you have a couple minutes to talk about this report? Yeah, totally. What I don't want you to do is feel like you didn't do an amazing job on your first swing at this report. But what I do want to do is work with you a little bit on some of the detailed information that was missing so we can provide the best report for a portfolio manager. Do you have a couple minutes to work with me on that? Yeah, no problem. There was no signs of that being all, about me or a negative thing, or me being able to take that intent out of context. So we go in and we clarify the intent before there's even any room to make negative assumptions. So that's a really good technique to try before you have those tricky conversations. Okay, so walk me through. I love this. And if you watched our leadership series, we talk about this there. But I love this question because it's such a great way to take kind of a back seat to a conversation before we decide how we feel about whatever it is that that person has talked to us about, before we make assumptions and, again, decide how we want to take action. So walk me through is a great way to allow another individual to clarify their perspective. So asking questions is a great idea in a conversation to allow you to take a step back. And walk me through is my favorite one. So sometimes people are going to come into your office and they're going to give you crazy ideas, or maybe they say things that you don't understand. And sometimes it's our reaction to shoot it down because we don't understand, or cut them off, or say that doesn't work, or it's not in the budget. So let's say walk me through instead to allow our speaker to explain a little bit more about where they're coming from. So let's say your maintenance supervisor has walked in your office and they're like, I've got a great idea. And you're like, let's hear it. They say, let's start doing grounds at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And you're like, so that's not really gonna work. Or we can say, okay, walk me through what that looks like for you. Walk me through how that affects our day-to-day operations. Walk me through how we're going to manage curb appeal before our residents or future residents show up to tour the property. And allow then your maintenance supervisor, hear him out. He might talk himself out of the idea, just going through the motions, but he feels hurt. And we are going to allow them the chance to authenticate this idea. And now you're going to go with more dialogue, right? That's the exchange of thoughts or ideas instead of just shooting this individual down. So walk me through is a great question to ask to, again, clarify your perspective and their perspective before we take action or become dismissive of thoughts or ideas. Remember that listening is a form of respect, and we want to give that to all folks that are working with us and for us. Okay, would you get on a plane if you didn't trust the pilot? I love this. Also, would you get on a boat if you didn't trust the captain? As a leader and as someone who is in a position to make decisions and navigate your team through difficult conversations and conflict, folks need to be able to trust your intent and where you're leading them. So make sure that we are really, again, taking that step back and identifying how to have productive conversations and communicate in a way that is progressive and productive for everyone. And it's also inclusive. We want to include everyone's thoughts or opinions, and that allows people to buy in and invest into you when they know that their thoughts and ideas are going to be included. It is a foundational piece of building trust. And that is at the very bottom of any leadership, is your trust and people's trust in you. So make sure that we are being inclusive, that we are listening, and we are respecting one another's ideas. That is the basics on how to have the productive conversations that you need in order to move through conflict. So now that we've covered communication basics, let's talk about conflict and what it is. So conflict at its core is just a difference of opinion. That's it. Let's not major in minors. Let's not make conflict out to be this crazy negative thing. That's combat that you're thinking of. Conflict is simply a difference of opinion. And conflict is exceptionally healthy. Conflict is how we think outside of the box. It's how we break through barriers. It's how we have conversations like, just because we've always done it this way doesn't mean we need to continue to do it this way. If everybody just agreed all the time, I can't even imagine where we would be. We have to have a certain level of conflict in order to be productive, in order to be progressive. It's when conflict is mismanaged, this is when it begins to harm relationships. And again, it transitions into being combative, not healthy conflict resolution. By learning the skills that you need to handle conflict, that's how we have critical conversations that really take us to the next level, and we work through areas of tension, we solve issues, and we collaborate together as a team. Anytime my own team has gone through conflict, we always come out on the other end feeling more connected to each other, more empowered, more powerful, because we've gone through something together. When we ignore conflict and sweep it under the rug, that pile is going to build and build and build until eventually somebody trips. And we want to avoid the trip. We want to handle conflict head on. And as a leader, we need to make sure that we are addressing it. You can smell tension, and it doesn't smell very good. And we need to be able to go in and address conflict at the earliest possible stage so it doesn't fester into this big, nasty conflict ball. So learning how to address it and the right way to address it is going to make sure that your teams are smooth, high-functioning, high-powered teams that have open, transparent communication and conversations. So this is one of my favorite things, and I want to talk about this woman. And I love her because she represents a difference of opinion that is really productive. So just go with me really quick. So let's talk about what she might be wearing. If you look at her, you might see that she's wearing a feather. You might see that she's wearing a shawl. You might see that she's wearing a choker, that maybe she has an elaborate headpiece. And what kind of roles might you see this woman? Maybe a fashion model, maybe a old-fashioned model, maybe someone who wants to be in another life a fashion model. How old do you think she is? Does she look like she's in her 20s? Does she look like she's in her 60s? And is she wearing any jewelry? I see that perhaps she's wearing a choker. So some of you, if you've seen this image before, know that you might be looking at two different things. So in this picture is both an old woman and a young woman. Let me help you see both before we move on. So if you see the young woman, you will see that she is wearing a choker around her neck. If you see the old woman, that's the old woman's mouth, followed by her chin. If you see the young woman, she has a feather in her hair, and the and her ear is on the side and her head is turned away. If you see the old woman, you can see her eye and her larger nose. So hopefully you can see both of them. But really what the point is that if I am positive that I see the young woman and you are positive that you see the old woman, we're both right. Two people can see the same thing, both be right, and totally disagree. It's an old woman, young woman moment, and we have them all the time. We don't have to agree. I can see what I see and you can see what you see, and we can have a total difference of opinion, and it doesn't mean it's wrong. The whole goal is for us to find understanding. So you might be positive that you see the old woman, but you can understand how I can see the young woman, but it's still the old woman in your opinion, and vice versa. I can be confident I see the young woman, but understand that you see the old woman. Your role in any conflict is not to convince me that I don't see what I see and that I don't feel what I feel. Your goal is to understand, which means we're asking questions. Walk me through how you see the young woman. Talk to me about the young woman. Okay, yeah, I can kind of see that. We are never going to spend time convincing people that their feelings aren't legitimate and their perspective isn't legitimate. That's half the conflict anyway, right? That's when we end up arguing about arguing, is when we try to convince people that their perspective is wrong. Their perspective is never wrong. It's all about creating understanding. And that's what we're doing here. When we say old woman, young woman moments, our goal, and that's going to trigger us to go in and start creating that understanding. Because again, two people can see the same thing or different things, both be right, and still disagree. And that's totally fine. It's okay to disagree. The goal isn't to convince someone to believe what you see or agree with you. You could say that the sky is blue and I can say that the sky is red. And even though that you know the sky isn't red, you got to understand where I'm coming from in order for us to make progress. Because is it about the sky being red or blue? No, it's about the actual problem you and I are going to start working together to solve. That's the whole goal. So conflict. Anytime we're dealing with conflict, we are dealing with emotional hot buttons. You and I are never going to get fired up about things that we don't care about. The good news is that anytime conflict is present, that means you and I both really care because there's passion driven behind that. And typically conflict is going to arise from values. So maybe you violated something that I care about and I'm going to go into protective mode and try to really get defensive and protect this value. It might be motivation. I think you're out to get me. I don't trust your intention. I feel like the decisions that you're making are not good ones, or I don't trust them, and now I'm going to question them. Perceptions. I perceive a situation one way and I'm lacking understanding on how to see it from your perspective. Maybe it's ideas. I want my idea and I'm going to fight for it because my idea is the only right idea that ever was a right idea. I'm sure you've worked with people who are very stuck in their ways and inflexible that way. And we want to be able to be flexible to change and new ideas. And desires. I want this outcome and I'm going to fight to get there. So notice that in all of those situations, they're self-motivated. They had nothing to do with anybody else but me and my own perspective. I have the power to change how I feel about a situation just by taking a step back and creating some understanding. Conflict can sometimes be self-inflicted, and we don't want to self-inflict conflict. So let's make sure that we're taking a step back and saying, okay, does this have anything to do with me, or does this have something to do with the other person? Because nobody makes you feel some type of way but you. I get to decide how I'm triggered, how my emotions come into play, and sometimes I need to just maybe take a second or take a breath before moving into a conversation, because at the end of the day, we need to work together and solve the problem, not solve the person. And that's what we're going to be working together towards. Because what we've just learned is that we both care. We can agree always that you and I both care as we move through conflict. So emotions. Emotions play a really big role in conflict resolution because, again, if I'm getting fired up about something, it means I really care. So my attitude and my triggers are going to play a very big role. If I have a negative attitude about you or a situation, it's going to make it very hard for me to change that mindset into a productive one. And I need to be productive in order for you and I to work together. We don't want to let conflict become a battle of emotions because then we are emotional arm wrestling. My emotions are better than your emotions, and it doesn't solve any problems. We need to take a step back and figure out what is the real issue and why are we both getting so upset. After discussing what the problem is, you're going to find out that two of you want the same thing. Maybe I'm your community manager and you're my maintenance supervisor, and I really want you to start doing work orders in building 1, but you want to do them in building 2, and we're getting upset because I don't like when my schedule's messed up, and you don't like when your structure is messed up. But at the end of the day, we both want work orders to get done. We can agree on that. And I can take a step back and talk to you about your perspective, and we can find a way to agree. But we both care, and that's why we're getting fired up. So when you recognize emotional triggers, make sure that we are taking a step back again to really vet out those triggers and what they are and why they're showing up so you and I can be productive. How do we both win? What's the greater goal? What are we working together to resolve? Conflict resolution is simply emotional problem solving. And I think we all can consider ourselves pretty good problem solvers. And that's what we're doing. We have to have the clarity to know that when we see somebody getting upset, that we are able to go in and figure out what it is that they're trying to protect. It's that simple. And because you've got the training and you now have the skills, we might need to take a breath and put our own emotions and triggers to the side to protect somebody else's, because at the end of the day, nobody gets to take away how you feel, but we do need to figure out what the real problem is. That way we can solve it. It's not me against you. It's you and me against the problem. And that is the goal, is to calm emotions down enough for you and I to have a productive conversation. And that is going to come down to managing our own triggers. So being out of touch with your emotions can cause you to see conflict out of context. We have to know what our own triggers are because it's going to affect how we perceive certain situations. A lack of understanding can create silly disputes. One of the biggest ones is where you can't see where somebody else is coming from. So I don't understand why she's getting so upset about that. It's not a big deal to me, but it is a big deal to somebody else. I'm sure if you are working on site and your residents come in and they are very upset about, let's say, the doorstop being, broken, and they put in a work order 2 days ago and it's still not done, and we're like, oh, calm down, it's a doorstop. What we need to understand is that people get fired up about the things that they care about. And I don't know about you, but the housing bill that I pay every month is the biggest one that I take care of. And I care a lot about my home. I'm raising my family there. That's what we do. We take care of the way that people live in property management. And if something in my home isn't broken or is broken, and I've submitted a work order for you to come fix that, and it's not a big deal to you, it's not about the doorstop. It's about my home. It's about you taking care of the way that I'm living. It's so much more than the doorstop. And so that's the value that I'm trying to protect, is my home. And I need you to see that. Even though you can't understand straight away, you have to be able to put yourself in my shoes and understand that that could be a trigger for me. And what's the real problem? What's really going on underneath the doorstep? Understanding that everyone's feelings are legitimate, and you going and figuring out how and creating that understanding is going to be huge in conflict resolution. And even just asking a simple question like, how do I make this better for you? That's a game-changing question, because that's our goal, is how do I make this better for you? I'm sorry we dropped the ball on getting the work order done for you. How do we make it better? That's going to be huge. When you recognize the legitimacy of anyone's concern, it's going to help you create understanding and move through that conflict. When's the last time you got fired up about something you didn't care about, right? If your favorite fruit is an orange and mine is an apple, I'm not going to tell you I'm never going to speak to you again, right? That's not how it works. There's always that emotion. There's always a value underneath why folks are getting upset, and you're going to be an emotional trigger problem solver. So let's talk triggers. You got to be in tune to your own triggers because those are going to show up. Mine, I don't like when I feel like I'm not being heard. Like that to me is a huge trigger. And what will happen if I feel like I'm not being heard in a conversation, I will try and take it over. It's something that I know about myself. I'm a serial interrupter. I get really excited. I want to share my ideas. Or if I feel like I'm not being heard, I'm going to talk so loud and over you so that way you hear me. And I know that about myself. So when I'm going into conversations, I speak second. So I allow you to go first so then I can take all the time that I want. Just kidding. But I want to make sure that I hear you before I try to take over a conversation or fight to be heard. And I make sure that it goes both ways. You get a chance to speak and I get a chance to speak. But I also know that I'm that individual. I also know that if anytime I feel like my integrity is questioned or quality of work is questioned, I get really fired up as well because those are values that I sincerely try to protect. They're really important to me. So I have to go in and clarify if I feel like my integrity is being questioned or my quality of work is being questioned, so that way I can maintain a clear head to have a productive conversation. So let's say I turned in a project that wasn't up to your standard and you needed to talk to me about that. I would go in and say, I need to clarify that this is about the project or about this detail because the way that you're speaking to me makes me feel like it's actually about me. I'll actually go in and just clarify and get that off the table so I can remove myself from feeling like I'm under attack. And that's my personal responsibility, is to clarify if I have a feeling about your intent. I can't expect you to mind read where I'm at. I have a responsibility to communicate where my current mind frame is and go in and clear it up before I have a Chicken Little moment like the sky is falling. And we all do that sometimes. We tell ourselves stories about how other people might be feeling. Like, have you ever gone to check your email and your password doesn't work and you're like, I'm totally fired today. Like, today is the day that I got fired, right? And those are stories that we tell ourselves. And then we say, oh, my email's not working. I call my boss, they didn't answer their phone. Now I'm really fired. Like, the sky is falling. We have to talk ourselves out of those stories and get back to the facts versus the feelings. So recognizing our own role in conflict is really important. And I encourage you to take a couple minutes and write down your own personal triggers. What gets you fired up? I like to share the things that I get fired up about with my team, so that way they know. I want to be transparent about that with them. And I allow them to be transparent about their triggers with me. So that way, when we're having more difficult conversations, I am aware of those and I can help protect those before they even become a problem. It's a great way to protect a working environment and create a container where you can have productive conversations because you've already established what this zone looks like. And we'll talk a little bit more about creating safe spaces as we move through communication and conflict resolution. So thank you so much for joining me for part one. And part two, we're going to continue the conversation about communication and conflict resolution and break down the steps to have healthy conversations. So I can't wait to continue. We'll see you next time.
If you found this clip useful, please remember to like and subscribe for more. You can also visit us at multifamilystudios.com to view full episodes of our latest and greatest shows and interviews.